When you're trying to decide whether a mobile workstation is worth the jump from a regular laptop, the uncertainty can feel like a whole day project in itself. You start wondering if the extra horsepower will actually translate into smoother daily work, or if you'll end up paying premium for a machine that only shines on paper. That's the exact kind of hesitation I'm trying to clear up today, so you can see if this ThinkPad really fits the way you work or if you'd be better off with something less ambitious. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, let's talk about the kind of tasks that push a laptop into workstation territory. I'm looking at engineers who run CAD assemblies, video editors stitching together 4K footage, and data scientists training medium-sized models. Those users need a combination of CPU muscle, enough RAM to keep multiple heavy apps open, and a dedicated GPU that won't force them to drop down to integrated graphics the moment they open a complex file. The ThinkPad P16s Gen 3 is built around that premise: an Intel Core Ultra 7155H, 32GB of DDR5 memory, a 1TB SSD, and an NVIDIA RTX 500 with 4GB of VRAM. On the surface it checks all the boxes, but the real question is whether those boxes line up with everyday workflow. If you're someone who primarily uses Office apps, web browsing, and occasional media streaming, the extra GPU and the extra RAM are likely overkill. You could get similar performance from a mid-range Ultrabook at a fraction of the price, and you'd free up budget for accessories or a better monitor. In that sense, the P16s is not a universal upgrade, it's a specialized tool. Who should consider buying this machine? I'd start with 3 core profiles. First, CAD professionals who use software like SolidWorks or AutoCAD on large assemblies. Those programs tend to hog both CPU and GPU, especially when you're rendering a detailed model or running real-time simulations. The Core Ultra 7, while not a traditional Xeon, still offers enough cores and high clock speeds to keep those workloads responsive, and the RTX 500 ADA, despite its modest 4GB memory, has hardware acceleration that can offload a lot of the shading work. Second, video editors who work with 4K timelines. The 32GB of RAM means you can have a full editing suite, a proxy cache, and a media player all open without hitting swap. And third, data analysts who run Jupyter notebooks with pandas and lightweight machine learning libraries. The SSD's 1TB capacity gives you room for datasets, project files, and a local copy of Python environments without constantly juggling external drives. On the flip side, who should skip it? If your day revolves around Word documents, spreadsheets, and email, you'll never tap the GPU's potential. Also, gamers who expect a 6GB or 8GB GPU for high framerate titles will find the RTX 500 ADA a bit limiting. Its 4GB VRAM caps you out of newer texture-heavy games unless you dial settings down. Finally, anyone who travels light and needs a battery that lasts a full day of meetings will notice the P16s's power envelope. The more powerful components draw more juice, and the battery life tends to hover around 5 to 6 hours under mixed use, which is less than what many Ultrabooks promise. Now, let's dig into the practical strengths that become apparent once you start using the machine. The first thing I noticed was how the extra RAM kept the multitasking experience fluid. I was running Visual Studio, a local Docker container with a PostgreSQL instance, and Chrome with a dozen tabs populated with Stack Overflow answers. The system never stuttered, and swapping to the SSD was practically unheard of. That kind of headroom is what you need when you're debugging a complex codebase and you can't afford a moment's lag because the OS is trying to clear memory. The SSD performance also made a noticeable difference. When I transferred a 150GB project folder full of high-resolution textures and video clips from an external drive to the internal drive, the copy completed in under 3 minutes. That speed translates directly into less waiting time when you're pulling assets into a project. In my workflow, that saved several minutes each day, which adds up over weeks. Another advantage is the display. The 16-inch panel at 1920x1200 isn't a 4K screen, but the extra vertical pixels over a typical 1080p display give you a bit more real estate for toolbars and timelines. Watching a movie on it felt crisp, and the color accuracy was good enough for casual photo editing. For professionals who need to trust the screen for color-critical work, you'd still pair it with a calibrated external monitor, but for most everyday tasks the display is a nice middle ground, bright enough for office lighting and sharp enough to avoid eye strain. The RTX 508's real-world benefit shows up when you open a 3D model in SolidWorks and enable real-time shading. The GPU handled the viewport smoothly, and when I switched to a photorealistic rendering mode, the render time dropped by roughly 30% compared to using integrated graphics. That is a tangible time saver on a deadline. However,